And you are live.
Thank you, Heidi. Uh-oh. In my previous two presentations, I discussed luminescent tagging on United States postage stamps. Specifically, I discussed why we have them, how they came about, the technology related to their implementation, and how to identify various types of tagging. In the first presentation, we looked at the experimental years that brought about the luminescent tagging of postage stamps. It all began with Postmaster General Summerfield's vision to automate the post office. The first automated post office was opened in Providence, Rhode Island in 1960. Right from the beginning, they realized that the automated machinery had difficulty in reliably locating the stamps on the envelope as they were fed into the facer canceling machine. Pitney Bowes Corporation, maker of the machines, proposed to use long-wave ultraviolet to highlight the stamp location. National Cash Register proposed applying an organic phosphorus compound to the stamps to make them identifiable to the automation. The NCR approach had an added benefit. It allowed the facer canceller to separate the airmail from the surface mail. In 1963, the Department of the Post Office experimented with the NCR approach with a limited use of tagged stamps in Dayton, Ohio. The initial experiment proved successful, so in 1966, they expanded it to the Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana three-state region. Subsequent to this regional implementation, the program went nationwide. In the second presentation, we addressed how the process of tagging matured and the various ways the taggant was applied to the stamps. Today, we will delve into the use of the tag as an art form in the design of the stamp. Before we start on today's topic, I need to correct an error in what I presented in my Part 2 presentation. In response to questions, I provided definitions of luminescence, fluorescence, and phosphorescence. However, in my discussion that phosphorescence was first discovered in the mineral fluorite by George Stokes in 1852, I reversed fluorescence and luminescence in the hierarchy of terms. I should have said that fluorescence is a subcategory of luminescence. Luminescence is the generic or general term for the process in which material absorbs energy from an external source and emits that energy in the form of visible light. Fluorescence and phosphorescence are two of the subcategories of luminescence. The third category, or subcategory, is chemiluminescence, which comes from an active chemical process and is therefore not relevant to philately. Fluorescence is the emission of radiation, especially visible light, by a substance during exposure to incident external radiation of a shorter wavelength, such as X-rays or ultraviolet light. Phosphorescence can occur chemically from the slow oxidation in the case of phosphorus, or after exposure to external light or other radiation from which there is any luminous radiation emitted after the removal of the external exciting agent. Phosphor is the generic term for any chemical compound that exhibits luminescence. Hopefully this clarifies the subject of terminology and its definitions. Before we get into our subject matter, I must remind you, never look directly into the light emitted by a UV lamp. Direct exposure to UV light, particularly shortwave UV light, also known as UVB, will do permanent damage to your eyes. When working with a UV light source, you should always wear glasses containing a UV blocker. The light emitted by the stamps when illuminated with a UV light is eye safe. It is the UV light source used to illuminate the stamps that is not eye safe. As long as you do not look into the UV light source or allow it to be reflected into your eyes by stamp mounts or other mirror surfaces, working with tagged stamps is perfectly safe. If you work extensively with the UV light for long periods of time, you should consider wearing gloves and long sleeve shirts to limit skin exposure and prevent sunburn and related ill effects. All U.S. tag stamps were overall tagged. After printing, the face of the stamp was coated all over with phosphor taggant suspended in a varnish. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing came up with several ways to apply the taggant. The various methods used to apply the taggant left distinctive and consistent markings on the stamps that are visible under shortwave ultraviolet light. The results are referred to herein as application types of overall tagging, and while not catalog rated, are hard to find and are collectible. The Bureau's first approach to apply the taggant to the stamps was to overprint the stamps using rubber mats as the printing plates. This became known as a Type 1 tag. The second method replaced the rubber mats with a rubber roller. This became known as a Type 2 tag. The next improvement was to print the taggant on a rotary press where the transfer plate for the taggant was a smooth piece of steel. And later, a cloth blanket over a pressure plate or mat was used to apply the taggant. Later, when it became commonplace to print the taggant as another color in the printing of the vignette, block tagging was introduced. The first and most common block tags cover the full vignette of the stamp. One of the earliest experiments in tagging less than the full vignette of the stamp was done on the 1972 100th anniversary of mail order. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing's newly acquired Andretti press allowed experiments and less than overall tagging. On this issue, the taggant was applied in a 10mm strip as part of the vignette. The strip runs across the perforations and the selvage between the sheets. Adapting what they had done on the 100th anniversary of mail order issue, small block tagging was introduced on the photogravure printing of the 1970 Christmas stamps. This small block tagging was used again on the 1974 horse racing, the 1975 collective bargaining, and the 1976 Olympics issues. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing experimented with putting the taggant in the ink on several issues. The concept was that this approach would reduce production effort. However, the first attempt did not work out as planned. In 1968, the 6-cent Leif Erikson issue was printed using taggant in the ink. The printing technology of the time required the use of two printing technologies or printing presses. First, the background was lithographed with the tagged ink. Second, the engraved image of the statue was printed over the lithographed background using untagged ink. This process left about 1/3 of the vignette and the selvage untagged. In 1988, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing again experimented putting the taggant in the ink. Using lithography, they were able to do the printing in one pass on a multicolored press and use this process to produce the classic automobiles booklet stamps with the taggant in the depiction of the ground under the automobiles. The third try at putting the taggant in the colored ink was used to print the vignette. It occurred in 1999 with the printing of the beach umbrella stamp. The booklet pane was printed by lithography with phosphor in the ink depicting the sand. Up through the 1980s, all the variants in the tagging technology were focused on employing new printing technologies and the efficient production of the stamps. But in the 1990s, that changed. Under the new United States Postal Service, stamp printing was being migrated away from the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to commercial contractors. With this shift, the USPS conducted some experiments with anti-counterfeiting technologies. They put microprint in the vignettes of some stamps, and others they incorporated a patented documented security technology called Scrambled Indicia. Additionally, they explored making the taggant part of the design or artwork. Microprinting was first employed on the 1998 $1 Red Fox and has subsequently been used on numerous issues. It is, in a sense, hidden art because the microprint does contain hidden text. shown here on the red fox, you see it in the upper corner, it says USPS, and in the lower corner, it says red fox. Apparently, the chosen technology to combat counterfeiting, microprint, has been employed on so many issues that a full discussion is best left to a separate program. Scrambled Indicia was also first employed on the 1998 $1 Red Fox issue. It is a patented security technology from the Graphic Security Systems Corporation that prevents document duplication. It's designed to ensure the integrity of financial and legal documents. It was introduced as a technology, to combat counterfeiting. The USPS experimented with the technology between 1998 and 2004. It's unclear if they did it to prevent counterfeiting or to promote interest in stamp collecting, because they didn't just employ it on high value stamps, they employed it on many regular issues. The USPS sold a stamp decoder at local post offices that could be used to view the hidden images on the 42 stamps that incorporated the technology. Again, a full discussion is best left to a separate program. The third technology was to incorporate the Taggant into the design of the stamp rather than applying as an overprint. This was feasible because the Taggant was being applied as an additional ink in the printing of the stamp. This was first employed in 1999 on the American glass issue. Here we have it seen in ambient light and under the UV. You see that the glass is highlighted and lights up. The Universal Postal Union stamp, the Taggant was used to highlight the image in this 1999 issue. And I believe we showed this one also when we were talking about some of the advanced uses of block tagging in the second phase, of the second part of my presentations. This technique was taken to a new level in the 1999 Insects and Spiders issue. I'm not sure if the correct descriptor is cool or creepy. The year 2000 Stars and Stripe issue offered a new opportunities for the use of the Taggant in the design. Oh, wait a minute. Where'd the chart go? I've got a chart out of order. The year 2000 Stars and Stripes issue offered new opportunities to use the Taggant in the design. All the white stripes and stars glow green under the shortwave UV, which is a Taggant that was applied using the silk screening process. Up to this point, all the stamps employing the Taggant as part of the design were made with water-activated gum. The 2002 37-cent neuter or spay was the first issue employing pressure-sensitive adhesive to be printed with Taggant as part of the design. Then the practice stopped, and subsequent issues were issued with either overall or full vignette tagging for many years. And go back to that chart. They got out of order. The use of luminescent tagging may have started in actually didn't start in the United States, but it took a combined effort of the Canadians, the British, and the Germans, and the United States to come up with the techniques that were used, mostly driven by the commercial contractors who were making the equipment used for mail sorting. The US Convention of Green and Orange was adopted by many countries, but the UK chose to tag their stamps with a phosphorescent compound that glows pale blue, and later one that glows pale violet. and they continue to glow for several seconds after the shortwave light source is removed. Canada experimented with both the US and British approaches, finally settling on a multispectral yellow tag that is activated by both the long wave and shortwave UV. And here you see some of the blue Winnipeg tags. You see some of the early green tags, which proved to be very fugitive and will bleed, and then the yellow stripes that are used more commonly from the Canada stamps. The Champlain Souvenir Street was a joint issue by the United States and Canada. It is unique because it contains both US and Canadian stamps. When illuminated with shortwave UV, the US stamps exhibit a green block tag, while the Canadian stamps exhibit a bright yellow frame. In this century, Canada has incorporated a lot of anti-counterfeiting techniques into their high-value stamps. This one, the 2003 $5 moose, includes having the sky made up of hundreds of tiny moose hoof prints, 2 lines of microtype hidden in the picture, and an engraved printing. But beyond all of that, there's a surprise. Under shortwave UV, you see an aboriginal rock carving or petroglyph standing on the back of the moose. The Canadian 2019 $10 whale stamp incorporates even more anti-counterfeiting techniques to include a change in paper, multiple printing technologies, and the extensive use of microprinting. Well, most applicable to this discussion are the scuba diver and red kelp bed that become visible under the shortwave UV light. Also, the blue lines turned yellow, and the 6 scuba divers in different colors appear in the selvage. I find this example from China to be most interesting because the blue that appears in the center of each stamp when illuminated with the UV light is the plate number at the bottom of the sheet. So in ambient light, you see nothing of it. And when you light it up with the UV, you see a UV Taggant plate number in each stamp. This example from the Republic of Indonesia has 6 different images spaced across the stamp, as shown in the picture at the bottom. A picture from Austria. You see that the Christmas scene, when under the UV, lights up and enhances the image. This issue from Mexico is a joint issue with the United States. However, the images on the stamps of the 2 countries are very, very different. When illuminated under UV, this issue lights up petroglyphs in the middle of each of the stamps. Now, this particular issue is very hard to photograph because much of the ink used in printing the visible stamp image was also activated by the UV light, making it hard to discern. Plus, the paper was bright paper and it also glowed, so everything lit up when you put it under the UV. Here we have an example from Hungary. This issue is most peculiar. The issue honors outstanding Hungarian mathematicians, which are listed in red print around the perforations of the stamp on the sheet. But the 57 names that appear around the perimeter of the perforations are only visible under UV light. So the average person who purchases the stamp and never put it under a UV light source would never see the names of the individuals being honored and never see them listed around the outside of the stamp. Here, an example from Hong Kong follows the US convention of blue-green tagging rather than the hard-to-see blue tag commonly used in the UK. This Star Wars example Great Britain has issued several stamps employing UV activated ink in colors other than blue as part of the design. Here, this is the 2017 Star Wars issue, and in the lower strip, you see that the robot eyes and indicator lights light up under the UV light. The Harry Potter stamp here, under the UV light at the bottom, we see that there's a green Taggant hidden message comprised, and you see about 11 doodles and the following message at the very center of the sheet, which says, Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs offer fair compliments to Professor Snape and request that he keep his abnormally large nose out of other people's business. These Harry Potter stamps glow yellow under the UV light, giving action to the magic wands and creating a night scene which illuminates the vehicle lights. This sheet of stamps from the Isle of Man is truly awesome, and it's one sheet of a set of 8 that are all equally awesome. The 8 sheets were issued to mark the 100 years of the oldest independent combat air force in the world. The 16 stamps, there are 16 stamps spread across the 8 sheets. 8 stamps are printed on each side of the center label strip. And this arrangement made for the 16 separate blocks of 10 stamps. When viewed under the UV illumination, a series of dots and dashes appears on each of these stamps. When you look closely, you find that the dots and dashes are Morse code, and that the message encoded on each stamp in the block of 10 is the same. But the message on each block of 10 is different, so you have 16 different messages. When decoded, the messages spell out the 16 lines of the poem High Flight, written by John Gillespie Magee, Jr. There's 1 line per stamp. John Gillespie Magee, Jr. was an American aviator at the beginning of World War II, before the US became involved. He joined the Royal Canadian Air Force and was sent to England for combat training. He was killed in an unfortunate mid-air collision in 1941 before ever seeing combat. But portions of his poem, High Flight, appear on the headstones of many interred in Arlington National Cemetery, particularly aviators and astronauts. This is the poem, High Flight, which is spelled out across the 16 different stamps. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through the footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept highs with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew, and while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. The Isle of Man issued these stamps to commemorate the 300th anniversary of modern Freemasonry. Each stamp has been overprinted in Taggant with the Grand Lodge logo, shown at the lower right on a white background and oriented to match the image on the stamp. It has only been in recent years that the United States again started to incorporate the Taggant into the artistic design of the stamps. Here on the views of our planets, very reminiscent of the Neuter and Spey issue, the Taggant only appears on the planet and not on the text. Tagging just the image and not the background was also done on the Pluto Explored issue, which was issued at the same time. Like the earlier American Glass and Insects and Spiders issues, the Taggant takes the shape of the butterfly on the Eastern Blue-tailed Butterfly issue. The Star Trek issue exhibits a very unique use of the Taggant in its design. The stamps with red and blue backgrounds are tagged differently than those with yellow and green backgrounds. The block tag on the stamps with the red and blue background includes the perforation margin. On the stamps with the yellow and green backgrounds, only the vignette is tagged. The tagging on the sports ball is most unusual. The Taggant forms a donut or ring around the ball. The volleyball is further enhanced by Taggant lines along the seams. Historically, U.S. stamp production has not used inks activated by long-wave UV, with rare exception. Most notably is the 1995 78-cent Alice Paul stamp, which is a Scott 2943B. That was printed in a pale violet ink that appears bright pink under long-wave UV. However, the 2017 duck stamps exhibit an image enhancement when viewed under long-wave UV. Here you have the two stamps, the water-activated one at the top and the pressure-sensitive adhesive souvenir sheet at the bottom. And when you light them up, you see that they are very different when put under the long-wave UV. Again, in 2018, the duck stamps exhibit image highlighting when viewed under long-wave UV. This time the stamps look very much alike, but the trailing edge of the bird's wings and tail glow in the UV light. Before I turn this program back over to Heidi for questions, I want to thank all of you for the feedback you have provided after each of these sessions. You have found my misspellings and other errors, but most importantly, you have given me a wealth of new information and resources by which I have greatly expanded my knowledge. I now know that the UK, Canada, and Germany were all exploring postal automation in the same time period as the US. And there was significant collaboration between the countries because the same companies were developing the automated equipment used by all of them. I now know that there were additional tagging technologies that I was not previously aware of, most significant being a fourth type of tagging used in the experimental period that mimicked and in the early years was mistaken for type 1, type 2, and a type 2A tagging. It was the technology that resulted in the 5 variants of the 1966 National Park stamp discussed in my Part 2 presentation. Because of the new knowledge you gave me, I now need to update what I presented in these stamp chats. Maybe Heidi will let me come back next year with some expanded and more complete stamp chat sessions. Again, thank you for your feedback. Let's keep the dialogue going. Questions?